Hands all together to the 24th Benilde Model United Nations Guest of Honor, Honorable Leni Robredo.
Thank you very much. Maraming salamat po. Maupo po tayong lahat. Architect Dottie Acela Domingo, our OIC Vice Chancellor for Academics, Ms. Veronica Templo Perez, Vice President for Lasallian Mission and Student Life, Mr. Juan Ramon Odulio, Vice President for Administration, Ms. Marilyn Simatu, Vice President for Finance, Dr. Gary Ador Dionisio, Dean of the School of Diplomacy and Governance, Ms. Catherine Samaniego, Chairperson, School of Diplomacy and Governance, of course, Brother Mike Valenzuela, the other members of the Benilde administration, faculty, staff, of course, the representatives from the Rotary Club of Makati, who has been an able partner of our Angat Buhay program from the time I was Vice President until now. Good morning po sa inyong lahat. It is always a joy to be amongst De La Salle family. My late husband was a graduate of the De La Salle School of Engineering. I now sit at the board of De La Salle Dasmariñas. So, kapamilya po ako. All of us here today know that the United Nations was born out of humanity's resolve to create mechanisms for different peoples and cultures to get to know each other deeper, hear each other out, and together come up with solutions to challenges that no nation should face alone. It is important to note, however, that this resolve was itself born of a collective trauma. The world was just emerging from the ashes of a devastating world war. Entire cities had been leveled. Millions had died, and survivors bore scars in their psyche that no human being should be forced to bear. And so, in October of 1945, with the memories of war still fresh and fueled by the determination that such capacity for human suffering and destruction should never nations was officially formed, in the hopes that it would succeed where its predecessor, the League of Nations, had failed. We look back at the United Nations genesis from collective trauma so as to draw parallels to what we have all had to experience over the past years. This is, after all, your first model UN gathering that is happening in person after the pandemic. Millions have already died. Millions more are grieving. Economies are still reeling. And the suffering induced by COVID-19 has made us starkly aware that some challenges cannot be faced by nations standing alone. In fact, your two agenda topics, and I quote, adapting multi-sectoral approaches to establish an accessible healthcare system, close quote, and, again I quote, confronting the challenges of debt sustainability in the global pandemic recovery period, close quote, go into the brass tacks of this central idea, that rising from the trauma of the pandemic and ensuring that we are prepared should such a situation arise again, can only be achieved if we build bridges and transcend boundaries amidst interconnecting challenges. Beyond the pandemic, it is also from such a lens that we must view the many other challenges we face. These are challenges that do not pass through immigration lines or pause at national boundaries. Climate risk remains an urgent concern for all, with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres himself emphatically stating that making peace with nature is the defining task of the 21st century. The inequality gap continues to widen, with many from the marginalized sectors getting left further behind, while those privileged enough to be born with an economic head start get further ahead. Oppressed minorities continue to press against barriers that seem impossible to break. There remains a need to expand spaces where self-identity, whether of race, creed, heritage, or sexual orientation, can be freely expressed. Generations of exclusion and disenfranchisement have created an undercurrent of disaffection with the current world order. And this has been exploited by actors who care less about empowering others and more about pushing their own agendas forward. And while we acknowledge that there has not been a conflict equal in scale to the great wars of the 20th century, pockets of violence, cruelty, and aggression, some small and some bigger than others, persist around the globe. We have all stood witness to the new aggression of Russian forces in the Ukraine. Weapons that could induce great devastation continue to be made, especially in industrialized nations. Armies advance deeper into new battlefields. This is not to say that the UN has been ineffective. Let us imagine a world where the United Nations and the many other smaller forums for international dialogue, consensus building, and collaboration did not exist. Surely, that world would be filled with much more suffering and sorrow. By and large, and when push came to shove, the UN has allowed the better angels of humanity's nature to surface. At the same time, we are called to reflect on the UN and to ask ourselves the tough questions regarding what else can be done to make the world a better place for all. At the core of this is the task of constantly reorienting ourselves to the fundamental purpose of the organization. The United Nations is a space where nations and their peoples can come together as equals. Herein lies the inevitable insight that came after the horrors of war, a revelation that became so abundantly clear that 51 nations came together to assert it, with now a total of 193 member states affirming it. To put an end to human suffering, we must all begin to treat each other as human beings that have equal rights and are of equal worth and of equal dignity. And so today, even as we tackle the details of accessing better healthcare and debt sustainability, we are asked to anchor ourselves to the UN's animating philosophy, to remind ourselves that it is a space not to exercise power over others, but to empower them, not a space to make smaller nations yield to bigger ones, but one where we can enlarge our circles of compassion so that different nations can be looped into one organic human community. Diplomacy is more than just transaction. It is more than just the practice of leveraging what we can offer to extract from others what we need. It is more importantly about building authentic human connections so that such connections can be elevated to national ones. It is about finding the common thread that weaves every national flag into the single tapestry of humanity. I believe this practice, this exercise of solidarity with others, holds the key not only to facing the challenges in the international community, but to our own private and national experiences as well. We are called not only to hand bread to those who are hungry, but to sit with them, to break bread with them, to experience what they are going through as equals. We are called not only to help, but to truly empathize. I am sure that this is a task that you have already taken to heart as future diplomats, and look forward to seeing the good work that you will be doing in the days and the years to come. Thank you. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Mabuhay kayong lahat.